this is your first time joining one of our webinars, my name is Mark Stoddard. I run sales and marketing here at ClientSuccess. Really happy to have Peter on. If you've been following the sessions we've been doing for a while now, you'll know we've had some amazing webinars. We've got guests that have run just all sorts of different perspectives when it comes to customer success. We've had operators, thought leaders, consultants, investors, and everyone always brings their own flavor, perspective. Peter's going to be a great addition. And we are going to be recording the session. So if some reason you got to pop out early, we'll send out the recording afterwards. And I'm also going to make sure we get everything posted to the ClientSuccess YouTube channel, which if you haven't bookmarked yet, you definitely should. You just Google ClientSuccess YouTube. You'll see we've probably have 40 or 50 or so webinars posted there. It's really this cool collection, call it a masterclass of all things related to customer success. And so I've had a bunch of people reach out to me even recently saying, I just started in customer success, or I started a new role, and your perspective on how to build a great team, or to the one on how to build revenue, a renewal ops team, or how to start a team from scratch. There's all sorts of different ones out there. So if you haven't found them, go ahead, bookmark it, and take some time to review them. And with Peter, I'm really looking forward to this one because Peter's in a different echelon than a lot of the ones that we've had on. He runs a large team, large company, dealing with large customers. And so when we're talking about, quote unquote, delivering customer success at scale, Peter's really the guy to talk to. So I'm really excited. And before we jump in, I just want to frankly pay a few bills here. But if you're new to ClientSuccess, not familiar with who we are, what we do, we are the leading customer success growth platform. And so that means we're going to help with all things related to customer success, help you drive better onboarding, better adoption, better renewals, growth. And basically think of it as anything your CSMs need to provide a great customer experience, then give really good insights to your leadership team, collaborate on behalf of customers and what they need, all working toward better retention, better growth. That's really what we're all about. You see here, we're a leader on G2 in customer success. We won the 2020 Cody Award for the best customer success solution on the market. So if you're thinking about, a lot of you, it's Q4. You're kind of coming out of the throes of COVID and you're starting to think about 2021. What are we going to do to really build and scale our teams? And for a lot of you, getting a customer success platform like ClientSuccess is going to be a part of that. Reach out to us. We'd love to chat. Find us. We're at clientsuccess.com. Shoot me a note directly. I'm Mark with a K at clientsuccess.com, and really look forward to chatting with everyone. But so that's that. So coming back to Peter. So what we're going to do today, just kind of talk logistics. We're going to treat this as a little bit more of a discussion. Think of it more as a fireside chat. We don't really have a ton of slides we're going to go through. And so my ask to everybody is, if you have questions for Peter that you want to talk through, go ahead and put them in the chat pane. I just looked down at the chat pane and I see Star's comment that Peter's a badass. So yeah, let's be excited about that. So
Thanks, Star.
And so my ask is that all the questions that you put in, we're going to try to focus the discussion around what it says on the slide, customer success at scale. So take that on, maybe I'm on a large team and I'm looking on how to improve, or I'm working with large customers and clients and I want to learn the details of that. If you have questions around, we're a startup and we're starting this for the first time, or this is kind of, something new that we're trying out with, while we're going to have a lot of interesting conversations that will be, I think, relevant to that. If you want more like startup type advice, like go to our YouTube channel, you'll see a ton of stuff on that. So maybe without further ado, let's just I'm going to stop sharing and kind of jump into, let's see here. All right, so let me switch here to, there we go. So Peter, let's just kind of start here. I'd love for the folks on the call to hear a little bit more about you, a little bit more about your backstory. Obviously, you and I have chatted quite a bit and kind of, your backstory and the things that you've done. But, I'd love to for everyone to hear your story and then maybe start us off with like some of the high level things somebody needs to think about as they're thinking about scaling their customer success team.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. And hello, everybody. And I really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation about customer success at scale. It's probably like the thorniest and the biggest topic around. So we're going to try and do justice to it by answering some of your questions in the next half hour, 45 minutes. But my background in customer success, I'll call it a profession, encompasses being a CSM of an individual contributor, an architect of the practice. I've led the practice in a number of different companies. And I've been an industry researcher. I was at the TSIA for a bit of time and was their first VP of customer success research, which offered me the opportunity to talk to a ton of executives of companies of immense size and very small size and everything in between. So I felt like it was a huge learning opportunity for me to learn from executives trying to really do something in a big way. Sure. With something new at the time. That was relatively new at the time. And since then, since I've been at Oracle, I've been working with, again, like Mark said, large team. We're trying to do big things. Now we're trying to really expand our scope at a global level. And really our clients range in size, small, I'd say mid-sized to very, very large multinationals. And so it's complicated and it's challenging, but I like to say to people, I've done a lot of roles in my career, not always in the post-sales. I've been on the pre-sales side. This is the most gratifying. Where I am now is the most gratifying because I feel like I'm in a place that gives me the opportunity to be part of an initiative that has the best opportunity for making business impact with customers and helping them transform their businesses. So when I think of scale of customer success, I try and, this isn't definitive, but I kind of look at it as 5 things. You need to have executive vision and commitment, and the two have to go together. It's one thing to have the vision, but if they're not committed to it, and I'm looking at you executives, when I say this, that it's great to be enthusiastic about customers.
Are you talking customer success executives? Or are you talking about anybody in the C-suite?
I'm actually talking more about the C-suite outside of customer success, because usually the CS leaders are enthusiastic and understand what they need to do to some degree, but they need the help of other C-level executives. And I would say this is true about all companies. And so those other executives, I've worked with some of you, you need to have commitment to it. You can say, yeah, that's a great idea and go ahead, but you need to understand, you need to be patient with it too. So I would say to scale, you need to have that vision from executives along with the commitment that they're going to be patient until it starts to bear some fruit, meaning some empirical evidence that the scaling is working and you've got all the right operational practices in place and the right rhythm. And then you're actually showing some results that the customers are noticing and that you're noticing through your retention numbers and that sort of thing. And it leads me to the second thing. You have to have measurements in place, the ability to measure what progress is or what it should be. And obviously the heavy hitters are, retention numbers and growth numbers, but there's other things that you need to factor in, CSM productivity. You need to know how to measure that. And I don't mean just say, we're going to give them 30 accounts or 100 accounts each. You need to understand, you have really, before you even start this, you should understand what all the tasks are that they're going to be responsible for doing, and kind of at a granular level, understand the effort required. So I like to say to people, do all the research up front. Don't start doing the research after you actually get enthusiastic and start rolling things out. That's a little late for that. You'll probably, mistakes are fine, but it's best to do a lot of the research up front and then start establishing your model. And then, third, I would say, especially at the enterprise level, you need to understand that to scale, you're actually at that point introducing your practice to the rest of the company. It's easier when you're kind of a smaller operation and you're focusing just on strategic accounts or large enterprise accounts to do your thing and you're making a big impact and that sort of thing. But if you're starting to scale and you're touching theoretically, which is what you want to do, all customers, all of a sudden you're exposed to all the other organizations in the company, and you need to appreciate that they have a stake in this too, and that you need to bring them on side, and you need to start factoring in the ability to be diplomatic and a good collaborator, because their services are important too. And so you need to understand how you're going to do that. How are you going to be the orchestrator to bring the right services at the right time at scale to a lot of companies, a lot of customers. Fourth, I would say you can't do this. I don't think you can do scale. And I would argue you can't even do customer success without an operational practice within customer support, customer success. I mean, and that operational practice would be the ones responsible for actually the tooling, the processes, probably an element of strategy even. What comes next, what should come next, and what should we be looking at doing? And I like to boil it down to kind of I like phrases. And so I like to call operational practice based on science, facts, and tools. And I don't know how we would ever do what we do without looking at data and understanding that we need to get the insights from it before we can ever take action. Gut instinct is a variable, but we're trying to eliminate that as much as possible. So we like to base it on science, facts, and tools. And then finally, and not least important, are smart people. And I mean CSMs, but also leadership, managers, directors, VPs within customer success. They all need to be on board. It's very risky if there's leaders who don't fully buy into the mission, and yet they're there for one reason or another. They're part of the organization. They might be getting by through the personality or whatever. But I think if they're not fully on board with the mission, because customer success is such a transformative practice and offers the most potential, I think, for companies to really transform customers' business, it's imperative that everyone understand and buy into the vision. If they're not part of that, if they don't really buy into it, they really shouldn't be part of it. So I like to say smart people are the leadership and the CSMs together. And you know, CSMs, I'm responsible for that, enabling CSMs at Oracle. So we always have to think about where do we need to improve their skills, and we listen to them as well. So we try to involve them in their own kind of growth while allowing them or enabling them to understand how the mission continues to evolve as we go forward. So those are the 5 things I would say I like to keep in mind around scaling customer success.
So we've got executive vision, we've got measurements, progress tracking, we've got, you know, I'll call it play nicely or appreciate other teams.
Yeah.
Got some type of operational practice. And I know there's going to be questions around customer success ops. And I know we're going to dig into that a little bit later. So I'm excited to go into there. And then, you know, smart people with everybody on board. What is it? Jim Collins' Good to Great book of just like making sure everybody's on the boat, everyone's rowing in the same direction.
Yep.
You don't have a bunch of detractors.
Yep.
All
it's
that
a full-time job. And in fact, it's a full-time job of managers to make sure that they recognize how to nurture that enthusiasm and keep fueling the fire, I think. Yeah.
So let's talk about like the managers and fueling the fire. One of the questions that came in a little bit earlier was, you know, talking about like the different stages of growth. And I was listening to a really well-known tech CEO last week, and he was sharing how he's got a big team now. He's upwards of, I think, close to 5,000 people on his team now. And he was sharing how the stuff that I did at 10 people is very different than the stuff I did when we were at 50 people and 200 people and 1,000 people. And like I said, now he's scaling up to 5,000 people. So very different stuff that he was doing as a leader, and obviously very different things that the team was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think like customer success context, like I kind of think in my mind, there's these different step functions. There's kind of that initial step function. I've got 5 or 6 people, maybe a manager, and that's kind of like step 1. Step 2 is I get that up to maybe like 20 people. I've got a couple managers. I've got a director. Then it feels to me like there's another jump to around like 50 people where I've got a bunch of managers, a couple directors, VPs, and then maybe like 100, 150 people. And now I'm talking about people in customer success. You got a chief customer officer at that stage. So first of all, do you kind of agree with those steps? If not, correct me. And at the same time, like just at a high level, we don't have to go super into the weeds, but like, what are some of the things that companies need to think about going from step 1 to step 2 to step 3?
Yeah, I don't think there's a fixed formula. However, I think there's certain traits and behaviors that lend themselves or need to be brought to bear in a bigger way the greater you grow. So an environment where you have a total of 10 people in customer success, and one of them's a VP, and there's a couple of managers, one manager, and there's a bunch of CSMs. It's easy to have pretty effective communications at that level because they can be very personal and very personable. And so everyone gets to know each other, and you can almost operate as a single kind of brain. But then when you start growing quickly, things can quickly go out of control. If the right, I always talk about this. If you have the wrong leaders in place, things will go off the rails really fast, because it's all so much of it of your ability to kind of grow in a positive way hinges on the ability of your frontline people, your individual contributors, to execute well with precision against a model, and then with consistency, because the bigger you grow, the more your brand becomes exposed to your behaviors, and so it calls into play the ability of the leadership to be very effective communicators and consistent communicators, and always making sure and being transparent about what the mission is, where we're going, why we're going there, why are we growing, what are our intentions, and I mean as the company, but also as customer success. We are committed to eventually touching all of our customers. We recognize we can't do that overnight, so we're going to do it in a kind of a phased way. And the reason we want to do it in a phased way, because we want to do it well. And so we really want to refine our practice and do an extremely good job for the next 200 customers before we consider expanding it to 1,000. And so we want to grow you with us, CSMs. And so while we're doing that, we're going to help you by improving your skills. We're going to augment your ability to run the model through maybe some introduction of automation and a new tool. And so I'm describing a best case scenario, I think, where I think that prescription that I just described would produce the best outcome, because you've got people who are on board, who understand why you're growing, why you're pushing them to think in a bigger way, why it's important for customers. And I think we should never insult our CSMs. We should always share with them that it's imperative that we never leave a customer behind. Ideally, we don't want to leave any customers behind. We want to touch them in some way, because they could become bigger customers if we nurture them, if we're lucky enough that our fortunes intersect with their fortunes and they just happen to grow even without us, but they grow and then we happen to be with them, then we can benefit from that. So ideally, we want to touch all customers, but I think back to your real core question is going from level to level. For me, it really does hinge on really strong, effective communicators in the leadership role, but also the ability to kind of test your processes at each level, produce some results that are measurable and that you look at and say, okay, it's almost like you're benchmarking yourself at a level, and then you're satisfied with that. You're testing it with the customers. Make sure you don't miss that step. At each level, you got to test with your customers, talk to them, survey them, figure out, is this service valuable for you? Is it making a difference? If it's making a difference, and go a little bit deeper with them and even interview some of them and get them to tell you what they appreciate about the business and how important it is for them. And then think about going to that next level. Don't rush to the next level unless you have confidence, I think.
Yeah, the communication and the process, the communication around that. And the one thing I always think about when it comes to that communication side is, especially if you're the leader in that position that needs to communicate, there's also, to me, maybe I'm oversimplifying, there's an element of just repetition of that communication. You got to say the same dang thing.
You do.
One of some of the best executives that I've been kind of close to, I've heard the stories that they tell, and I know they've told that story tens of thousands of times, but like that's part and parcel to making sure that everybody gets the vision, everybody gets the mission of here's where we're going.
Yeah.
And so that's key to me. So another question that comes up here, let me see here. So you brought up around, early on, it's easy for kind of customer success to be at the forefront. We're a small team and people are always celebrating customer wins, et cetera. However, once the team scales, something that I've noticed, and I think other people have noticed, is if you're not careful, customer success can become potentially just like another kind of siloed data source. And we don't, I've seen teams screw this up where they just kind of let customer success kind of evolve in its own kind of siloed warehouse without making sure that all that feedback that especially comes from the front line goes all the way through the rest of the business. Early on, it's not uncommon for the head of product to get on the phone with a customer because, for whatever reason, because the head of product and the CSM are sitting right next to each other. But as you scale, that's harder to make sure that communication happens. How do you, I mean, you've managed large teams and I assume you've run into kind of, let's call it data siloing issues. What are some processes or practices, culture that you put in place to try to guard against that?
Well, I think you need to get all the executives together and everyone should agree on whose responsibilities are whose. So product management their responsibility should not include dealing with customers' broken products. That shouldn't be what they get, that sucks up their time. They should be focused on how the products can be made better for either the market fit or based on customer feedback or whatever. They should be looking forward. And then customer support should really step up and do a much better job of making sure that they're always evolving to make sure that the products that they're supporting, they understand patterns of behavior so that they can be ready to provide the right answers when customers report certain things. Then the answers are there because it's been seen before, or a number of kind of customers have reported the same thing, and so we can kind of correlate the information and say this is what needs to happen. You need to do these things, these certain steps. And customer success really needs to be strong around being the ones that have to look ahead and work with the customer. Ultimately, customer success needs to be very brave and really articulate about positioning themselves as the customer's guide forward towards their desired outcomes through a framework. And I think customer success gets in trouble when what's missing is they don't have a framework in place, because then people wonder, okay, what differentiates you from the other organizations who are also collecting data about the customer? The difference.
What does that framework need to entail?
It needs to entail a success plan. And that's kind of the industry standard. It is still not 100% something that companies do, however, in my experience. But I think, and I've been saying this a lot lately to our CSMs even, is that without a success plan, really you're not anything more than an account manager. And I always say, well, I don't mean to diminish the role of an account manager. I'm just saying, then why not have an account manager? You should have a practice that provides the customer with a framework for success. And the framework is the processes that are run to deliver the model. But at the core of that is a success plan that you work with the customer on to describe the goals that they need to achieve and all the milestones and all the KPIs. Without that, then it's really hard to resist the reactive kind of mode, because the customer doesn't have a reason to talk to you really unless something goes wrong. But with a success plan, it almost sets you up for a proactive kind of environment. And so back to the question, I think you really need to get all the leaders of these organizations to agree on what their responsibilities are going to be. And ultimately you want them to acknowledge that someone needs to take the lead with the customer. And you know why I feel like I'm 100% right on this? Because I talk to a lot of customers, and I don't say should it be customer success? All they say is, we need someone to take the lead, someone to be the one responsible for making sure we're moving in the right direction. And if you look at all the organizations within a vendor, none of them have that really in their mission to do. Customer success does.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like we always hear this thing that kind of goes around of quote unquote, who owns the customer?
Yeah.
And I think that's a tough one, because at different points in time, different people might own that moment.
That's right.
But there's not one group that owns the entire relationship. But I would say, and I'd 100% agree with you, that the customer success team does own, let's even call it just advocating on behalf of the customer. This is what the customer base is running into. And so my job as the customer success executive, manager, leader, whatever, it's to be the voice. You got these voice of the customer programs, but even before you have a formal voice of the customer program, it's just being able to communicate, here's what the customer base is saying, here's what the feedback that we're getting, and making sure that feedback gets all the way through. So
yeah, ultimately you want that feedback loop back into the product in a programmatic way, ideally.
Yeah.
So that the product can improve continually.
And I'm glad you brought up the whole idea of the success plan being something that's based on what the customer wants to achieve. And in essence, why they bought you, why they're working toward, and why they're working with you. Somebody wrote in a question here, basically, the question is, if a customer is not willing to engage, what other things can you do to get them engaged outside of going above them or going to somewhere else in the org? And to me, like, this success plan is tied in tightly with, if a customer is not engaging, chances are it's because they're not seeing you're able to help them achieve their goals.
Yeah. It could be a number of things. I think it could be that they're distracted. Maybe they're dealing with other vendors and other projects that they're working on, and the project they're working on with you is just not as high a priority, and they probably have the best of intentions. They don't mean to be rude or anything, but they just don't get around to responding to you. So I like to say to people, don't get to take it too personally, but at the same time, you should take it personally too, because you should look at what were you delivering up to that point. Really examine, was there value? Be honest with yourself. Was there value in what you were delivering to that point? And if you can really say, well, it's hard to say because we don't have a success plan in place. And, we did some product fixes for them. And I was involved in that, or, I would send them some literature once in a while. From a customer's point of view, that's all well and good, but that's not something they're going to drop everything to call you about either from now on. So I think, there's kind of a few dimensions to look at that challenge with. And I would say too, that if they're not responding to you, there's nothing wrong with actually engaging at the executive level. I think as long as it's done
to me, you should always have that line of sight, regardless. Maybe it's not at the same cadence of the frontline person you're working with, but you should always have a line of sight into that executive.
Yeah, and I would say to my executive, I would say, I'm not trying to call this person out, the customer out. I just want to know what's going on. Maybe your relationship, you find out maybe there's something going on in their business. But anyways, I also say to people, don't give up on them. Maybe slow down your phone calls and your emails, and then touch base. Just maintain a pulse. And sometimes they'll come around on their own, even after 3 months.
So let's switch gears and talk. You brought up customer success ops earlier.
Yes.
And so when I kind of think about ops as a practice, years ago, people that were scaling sales teams realized, okay, I need this sales ops function. We didn't even know what it was at the time. It evolved into this sales ops thing that helped us determine, when we're scaling a sales team, okay, you have managers, directors, VPs that actually own the number. And then you have this ops team that comes in and helps determine territories, quotas, comp structure, et cetera. And you're starting to see that come into customer success. And I'm glad you brought it up. So the question I would think about is, how does the role of customer success ops evolve? Where do you start to really bring them in and layer them in? And what are the types of things you would, especially if you're I bet a lot of people on the call have never hired customer success ops, or if they have, it's somebody that they hired off the sales ops team and they're saying, well, let's kind of go figure some stuff out. If you were starting customer success ops, When do you do it? What do they do?
Yeah.
Like, give us as much as you can there.
Yeah, I would say bring them in relatively early. And I say that meaning you might be a small company and you have 5 or 10 people in customer success, or even less than that. And you've got customers. But if you're starting to think about getting a tool like client success, I think the moment you have a tool, you're seriously looking at a tool and you already have established your charter and you've got processes and you understand what your deliverables are and you've got the kind of good foundation in place. As soon as you start looking at a tool, get an operations person. Don't make your CSMs responsible or your managers responsible for maintaining and growing that tool, because the tools is really a full-time job, in my opinion, because it needs to be based around the science of the practice. And if it's done well, the tool can really be a boost to your ability to scale, because it can bring the data, the data you need together if it's built and designed properly and you configure it properly. I think it can really accelerate your effort. But I don't think you can do this if you rely on your CSMs or your managers to maintain that. I think that's a really fatal shortcut.
So relatively early on, you're bringing them in, they're talking data, they're talking process. Are there, like, what are the first things that, besides implementing a customer success platform, what would be the first few things you kind of expect out of that operations person? It's like your first 90 days, I need you to go do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
I said Z because I'm talking to you. If I were talking to an American, I would have said Z. So I'm going to get somebody busting my chops for saying Z or Z. But that's fine.
I would say, probably it's not easy, but I would say that probably the most visible thing to come out of a tool needs to be the health score.
Okay.
The one that kind of creates the biggest conversation, I would say, is the health score. Because believe it or not, I mean, health scores have been around forever, even before all these tools came around.
Sure.
They would call different things like scorecards and stuff, and they're really valuable. But what the tools have done is basically programmatically bring in the data and build out an automated way to present the information, which is fantastic. But it also creates the opportunity for lots of conversation. I always say health scores from customer success should be something that the rest of the company should look on as kind of the North Star almost. Mm-hmm. Okay, this should be the truth about accounts. Now I don't pretend that that's true for us. Even a lot of companies struggle, but I would say in the first 90 days, if someone can come in, look at the tool, and work kind of independently, understand all the data that's coming in, and they talk to CSMs and stuff, and they talk to the leadership, and if they can come up with a health score that doesn't have to be bulletproof, but something that the company hadn't had to that point, I think it would really open people's eyes to the power of consolidating information and scoring a customer, which can then, based on what the score is, can generate actions. And that's ultimately what you want from customer success, is actions, right?
The thing that I will say on the 100% with everything you said there, and the one thing that I would add is that the thing that a lot of companies, I think, miss, or at least early on in their kind of customer success journey, is they think of their health score as usage.
No.
Usage is important. Usage is an input.
It's a variable.
But there's so many other variables to look at when you're building that health score. And I see so many companies get hung up on, we can't get our devs to focus at all on getting us usage data, so we're not going to do anything. When the fact of the matter is, there's 7 other things that impact customer health. And even if you didn't have usage in the format that you wanted in, you could still do those 7 other things and get yourself 80% of the way down the road. And then at some point, resources open up and you're able to get your usage data in, and then you get a more complete health score. But that's the thing that to me is one of the big misses that a lot of companies in scale up mode misses. It's, yes, usage is important, but it's not the be all end all. It's one of, multiple data points, especially when I'm working with large customers. Let's say I'm working with a large enterprise company. Yes, I do care about the usage, but I care about NPS. I care about the politics of what's going on. I care about who's the buying committee. I care about all these other things.
All those factors are important. And because usage can go up and down, and for perfectly valid reasons sometimes. It all depends on the application too. And so, yeah, I agree with you that don't hinge everything, don't bet everything on the usage.
So staying on this ops question. So we've had kind of several questions that are kind of around some version of kind of like capacity planning. Like, there's one question I think Drew wrote in, how much ACV or existing business do you recommend per CSM? And there's lots of different kind of guidelines around this. There's some people who say, oh, well, depending on, I think early on, you used to have people say somewhere between $1 and $2 million US of annual contract value.
We do that kind of stuff.
That's a CSM.
Yeah.
But then I also see some people that are saying, actually, no, we need to think much more like bottoms up about it. We need to say, okay, if a CSM is actually managing 40 customers and we expect the CSM to talk to each of those customers every month, okay, there's 40 hours worth of calls plus, 2 hours worth of prep work. And so there's kind of like a bottoms up function.
Yeah.
Long story short, I'm curious how you think about just CSM capacity planning in scale up mode. What are the top 2 or 3 things that you're looking at? I'm sure you're going into, well, I guess your Q4 is more starting, you guys end in May, right?
Yes, that's right.
So you're doing your annual planning. You're not quite there yet, probably. Or I guess big company like you, maybe you guys are already doing it. But when you go into annual planning mode and you're thinking about capacity planning for next year, what are the top 4 or 5 things that you're looking at?
Yeah, so we look at the market, obviously, and the accounts that we're going to be that we are responsible for, but also obviously the pipeline. What's the sales pipeline? What's the propensity or the likelihood they're going to close in the next 2 quarters? So we have a good idea about what our short-term needs are going to be, and we can project forward. You're right. Oracle's a big company. There's very sophisticated kind of practices in place that can do a good job of projecting what our business is going to look like a year from now. And so we're not operating blind that way, but you do have to kind of under guess it too. You don't want to kind of go over. I think in terms of capacity, ACV, of course, is critical. But my opinion is that the pandemic has exposed a challenge, I would say, for business in general, for vendors in general. And that is to say, you don't quite know who's going to be around in 2 or 3 years as a company, I mean. And I don't mean fatalities. I'm talking about just survival as a business. And so is it a good idea to place all your bets with only at a certain companies above a certain size ACV, or should you still keep your close eye on the others? And I think I guess what I'm saying is be a little bit more nuanced about that exercise. Do the ACV for sure. We do that. It's smart. But then go a little bit further and say, what are the industries in the next couple of years, companies like McKinsey are saying are going to do well? It's not lodging. It's not the airlines. There's things that are obvious, sectors that are going to struggle. And other areas like digital kind of companies are going to do, some of them are going to do extremely well in the next couple of years. And so I would say just kind of factor in a little bit more science to that exercise in terms of the capacity. And so you wouldn't want to have 1 or 2 CSMs loaded up with all the kind of legacy kind of industries and another CSM with all the digital stuff. That's because that one person's going to be super busy and the other one's going to have a dying business. So, it, like everything else in customer success, I feel like you got to take it very seriously and do a good job of really studying and doing the research.
Yeah, I'm glad you say it because it's definitely much more nuanced these days. I think, 7 or 8 years ago, you could get away with just saying, yep, here's the number of ACV, do it, divide it, and we call it good. But what you're saying there is far more nuanced and I think far more relevant to us in 2020.
Yeah.
Let me see here. What other questions did we want to dig into?
Was my video jumping around a bit?
Your video jumped around a little bit.
Okay.
Let's see. So I think your video is off now. So I just went and shared the screen.
Okay.
Which is just fine. So let's see here. So you brought up something at the very beginning that you've kind of done. You've been a frontline CSM but you've also done kind of leadership roles and all sorts of things. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is, when either, you're looking for a customer success leader, like how important is it that a customer success leader has actually spent some time on the front line to develop that empathy, develop that muscle, to understand what life was like as a frontline CSM. And like, if I'm like, do you think that is critical in order to be an effective executive in customer success? Do you need to have spent some time on the front line?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say it's not critical. I think it's important. And it doesn't have to be a CSM role. I think it needs to be more, I would call it just customer facing.
Okay.
If you're in a customer, even if it's on the sales side, like a pre-sales solution consultant, I think that would be a good kind of role to kind of come from. But also customer support architect, people who work closely with customers and kind of naturally develop the ability to kind of have probably constructive conversations with customers in kind of heated situations. And I think that helps a lot,
Got it. Yep. I think that makes sense. Cool. There's some questions here around, like, again, like, let's call it like customer success organization. So like, knowing what little I know about Oracle, you guys would tend to have, well, this is more kind of a question, is like, how do you guys actually split out your teams? Is it split by product, by region, by company size? Do you have, like, I think the most natural kind of progression that I see from companies is like, early on, they have their customer success team. And then as they get a little bit bigger, they break them into, okay, I might have an enterprise, a mid-market, and an SMB team. And then, beyond that, what are the other things that, I should think about? Should I be thinking about splitting my team by product, by geography, by something else? Like, how do you guys think about, as you're planning and scaling up your teams, like your CS coverage and the different kind of swim lanes that you have? Hopefully that question comes across and makes sense. But like, how do you guys think about the matrix of customer success?
Yeah. I mean, it makes total sense. And the way we look at it is we start from the application level. So our organization is responsible for all the SaaS applications, and that it ranges all the way around from the back office. We call back office with ERP, enterprise performance management, supply chain, human capital management, and then all the way through the front office, which is our marketing cloud, service cloud, sales cloud, commerce cloud, all that kind of more front customer facing stuff. So we look at it that way. So we've divided up our organization into those two things: front office and back office. And so we have CSMs underneath both those areas, and then and so all the CSMs in the back office are then divided according to the solution. So ERP is huge, right? So we have ERP CSMs and we have HCM CSMs. But having said that, we also are now trying to have our CSMs kind of cross learn the solution, so that, because as the Oracle continues to find success in the cloud, we're selling a lot more applications now, and a lot of companies are buying multiple solutions. So we don't want to have situations where we have multiple CSM. Yeah. So ideally we'd like a CSM to handle a couple of solutions for their account. Now, having said that, there are some really massive customers who have almost all of our solutions, and it's too much. It's impossible for a human to be that CSM. Sure. So we have what we call a CS executive, a CSE, who is more like an account executive, or the equivalent of an account executive, very senior, many years of experience. And they act as truly the quarterback for the entire post-sales experience. And so they're part of our organization. There's not that many of them, but that's a growing kind of area of our organization. And then below that, so I'm talking about the top 20% of our accounts. And then for the rest of our customer community, we've got a digital practice, right? So we've got, and it's not, I mean, it's CSMs, but they have the typical large ratios of accounts. And so they are operating a lot of the self-serve platform, but also a lot of push content that gets pushed to the customer based on where they are in the journey and that sort of thing. So it's based on product, but also geography. So we're responsible for North America. We have a South American practice or customer success organization. There's an EMEA one, and there's a JPAC. Now, again, having said all that, we have the different regions, but now we're in a position right now where we're coming together to establish global standards for customer success. So similar kind of enablement, similar kind of service delivery. All the regions will still operate autonomously, but we'll all share the same sort of practice so that our multinational customers will have the same experience wherever their teams are.
Buying here in APAC, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Brian asked a question, and it kind of comes back to kind of, again, the evolution of your team. And his question is directly on, what are your thoughts on CSM zoning, onboarding, as well as, you know, kind of adoption and the rest of the journey? Mm-hmm. This comes back to another thing that I commonly see is that, you know, it seems like when customer success first gets started, you have a CSM, you kind of, the first split is like support and customer success, those get split off. And now I have a customer success team, and that customer success team kind of owns the entire journey post-sale. And then at some point, I see companies splitting off and having like an onboarding or implementation specialist, and then customer success takes over after that. Yep. For you, are there any kind of standard thought processes, frameworks, implications that say, if your company looks like this, or if your customer base looks like that, you should think about splitting out your onboarding from a more adoption renewal type customer success team? Or is that tough to nail down because it's so different everywhere you go?
It is tough to nail down. We do have we've combined in the last year or so implementation managers and put them into the same organization as customer success managers. So the goal was to have CSMs do the entire lifespan of the customer from we call it signature to signature. So from implementation all the way to renewal. That's really, it's hard to do it in practice because, you know, it's just a lot for people to comprehend all the different kind of responsibilities and tasks that they need to deliver.
A technical product, and you have somebody who's more of a relationship type.
Exactly. So we're reaching a point now where that's kind of becoming the reality for us. And so we do have people who are really good at the implementation side. So we're just weighing right now whether we need to just kind of focus them on that because they're just excel at that. And then we have others who are fantastic at the whole relationship nurturing, driving the adoption and driving the success plan forward. So that's kind of the conversation we're in the middle of right now, frankly.
Which I assume is part of that whole customer success executive that kind of sits like the quarterback. I assume that's all part of the same discussion. Yeah. Earlier, we talked about, you know, customer success ops and bringing in a customer success platform. Don asks a question, you know, can you speak to the chain of integrated tools to be used company-wide that automate customer success as much as possible, and that make sure that all that customer success data gets spread company-wide? Like maybe not necessarily the specific tools unless you want to, but like, what are the types of tools and solutions that you think should be used kind of, you know, company-wide in this process?
Yeah, I mean, I do subscribe to the vision that some companies have, that the CRM should be the kind of the trusted source of truth. Yeah, whatever the expression is. Single source of truth. And so I think that in a perfect world, the CRM would be that, and the customer success tool would draw from that. And be able to kind of push information to that, and then the way I think of it is, I think that sales and customer success need to have integrated processes to reduce these opportunities for a lot of friction that happen, a lot of drop balls. I think we're getting a lot better at it, but we're not perfect at it. And so there's still a lot of kind of the human dropping of balls and stuff. It all depends on the individuals. And so we want to be able to reduce that as much as possible. So we are working a lot closer now with our sales ops counterparts and sales executives so that everyone understands at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is reduce friction for customers and improve the experience so that they have a really kind of pleasant journey all the way through, all the way to the point of renewal. So the way we think of it is that if we're able to do that, by the time of the renewal is approaching, there's less reason for the customer to resist or to balk or to question the value, because they've enjoyed the experience all the way along. So in terms of tools and CRM, for sure, I don't know how you get by without one. And then the customer success tool needs to be a huge part of that play. Again, I don't know how you can get by without one. And then it needs to be, I think the customer success tool can have a broad span there, sitting on top of the CRM, so that it's the one that observes the journey and drives some of the actions for the journey all the way along, all the way through renewal, and eventually, into some growth phases for the customer too. So I don't know how to describe it other than I see this kind of as a living organism, sales and customer success kind of on a continuum.
The way you describe it makes a ton of sense. You kind of have your sales CRM that your marketing team, your sales team uses, and that the way I think oftentimes of an event of a CRM is it's kind of like an event-based solution. It's like I'm trying to drive toward some deal closing, some opportunity closing, something like that. Whereas the CS platform is much more managing the ongoing relationship. And
That's right.
there's points in time where they need to intersect. And you guys at Oracle are one of the few companies that have lived this interesting dynamic of, you come from the enterprise software world where you would sell something and kind of probably send it over the fence, and there was no need in the old days for an ongoing relationship type thing that managed what a CS platform does.
Correct.
But now that you've made this transition over to SaaS, you've now seen the world move, and so you guys have a really interesting viewpoint on that. So I totally agree with you in terms of you need the CRM, you need the CS platform, and then what I find from there is that it depends on your individual use case. There's some companies who, okay, I need a little bit more data and analytics than either my CRM or my CS platform can provide. So I need to go buy a dedicated, CRM or a dedicated data platform. I go buy a Tableau. I go buy a Delta.
Yeah. We have a
kind of case by case.
Yeah, we have a CDB that we tap into as well. And the one thing I forgot to mention is basically a service desk application for customer support, and that's vital, of course, that it needs to be plugged into the customer success platform.
And for me, the way I think about it is like the key value add for any customer success platform. Obviously, I have a vested interest in client success, but for any customer success platform, it's tapping into all those data points that are relevant to the customer experience. So you're pulling in data from your CRM, you're pulling in data from your help desk, but also you're pulling in data from usage, you're pulling in data from your NPS, you're pulling in data from all these other things, so that a CSM who's managing the ongoing day-to-day relationship can say, okay, here's everything that's going on, and back to our discussion on health, here's how health is trending up, here's how health is trending down, etc. But obviously I can go for another half hour on that topic, but
and I think I would just say on that, I think if any executive questions, why does customer success need all this? Well, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is provide insights and guidance for customers based on the ability to kind of aggregate a variety of data sources together and give them ability to move forward. Who would argue with that? So anyways.
Especially if your customer, not only your customer success, but you're back to the whole like C-level executive really understanding and being bought into customer success. If they really understand the economics and they say, a 1 or 2 point improvement on retention, how that has potentially at scale such a drastic impact on the revenue of a business over time, that to me is one thing that customer success needs to get better at communicating.
Correct. Yeah.
Something that, especially, we lived this over the last 6 months with COVID and everything that's happened in a lot of companies that weren't very data driven about their customer success practice. When things tightened up, customer success in a lot of teams was the first thing to go.
Yes.
And extremely penny wise, pound foolish, because what's going to happen is you're going to lose all your CSMs. All of a sudden, your retention is actually not going to drop for another 6 to 12 months out, because those customers are on 12, 24-month contracts. But that is going to have such a long lasting effect on the long-term health of the business. So
yeah, I always say to customer success people who complain about, being the first ones to be let go, or I don't mean to sound harsh, but you got to prove it. You got to prove the value. I mean, the value wasn't evident, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Well, cool. I think we've gotten to a version of most of the questions that have come up, and really appreciate everybody's questions, everybody's discussion. I've learned a ton here from Peter. Really appreciate you taking the time. And maybe are there any last, 2 or 3 things that you want to mention to folks before we wrap up? Because we're coming up on the top of the hour, and I want to make sure we give everybody back their time. So what are the last 1 or 2 things that you want to share with everyone, Peter, before we wrap up?
I think I would just say, in terms of scaling customer success, be very serious about it. Don't rush to it. Do it with the scientific mind. Do the research. Test it, prove it. Spread the knowledge around, meaning evangelize it inside the company. Get people on, get the other executives on board, and say we're planning on scaling, and this is what we expect can happen with our customers if we do this, and here's why we know it's the right thing to do, because we've been able to do it. We've been able to test the results, and these are the results that are showing impact to customers. So be methodical, and it's the right thing to do, though, because ultimately you don't want to leave any customers behind.
Sure, 100% agreed. So really appreciate you taking the time. This has been super helpful. I've learned a ton. I think everybody else has learned a ton. And anything, I think from my side, what we'll do is, for those of you that are still on, we're going to post the recording. We're going to post it to our YouTube channel. I'll send an email out shortly, probably either later today or tomorrow, with the recording. My advice is to take this recording and share it with your teammates that might have missed some of this, or some of your executives who might not be quite as on board as the type of executive that Peter has mentioned. Yep. Because I think everybody will learn a ton from this. And again, Pete, really appreciate you taking the time. And we have another session coming up in a couple of weeks. We got 2 more sessions coming up in November with 2 other really cool thought leaders. I'll send out details on those shortly. But really appreciate everyone taking the time today. So
thank you, Mark. Thanks.